A crisis can feel like the world is falling apart. Structures you relied on collapse, and familiar paths vanish. Yet within this chaos, something ancient in you begins to stir, sensing that an ending might also be a beginning. The human mind fears collapse because it disrupts order. But Jung saw that such disruption is not always an enemy. When life strips away the roles and routines you clung to, it clears the space for a deeper self to emerge. In the middle of crisis, survival feels like the only priority. Yet survival alone is not the full story. Beneath the panic, there is an invisible process unfolding, one that is preparing you to shed the false self and step into something real. The seed of transformation is hidden in the very pain you want to escape. Like a shell breaking to free the life inside, crisis destroys what cannot grow further. What remains is the raw material from which the true self can take form. Carl Jung viewed crisis not as a detour, but as a gateway. When the familiar self-structure fails, the unconscious pushes forward new material. This confrontation forces you to meet parts of yourself long hidden beneath the persona and social adaptation. He believed that individuation often begins when the old ways no longer work. Crisis dismantles the illusion of control, breaking the surface of the ego's carefully maintained image. In that rupture, you are confronted with the deeper forces shaping your life. For Jung, crisis is a summons to dialogue with the unconscious. Symbols, dreams, and sudden insights appear more vividly during these times, guiding you toward integration. It is a chance to meet the shadow, reclaim forgotten strengths, and redefine your path. The turning point is not automatic. Without conscious engagement, crisis can harden into bitterness or despair. But with awareness, it becomes the very fire that forges a more whole, grounded, and authentic self, forever altering the course of your inner life. An external catastrophe is an event that disrupts life from the outside. It may be a loss, a disaster, or a sudden change in circumstances. An inner crisis, however, is a deep rupture within the self that challenges the very meaning of existence. External catastrophes demand immediate action. You must repair, replace, or rebuild. Inner crises demand reflection. They cannot be solved with quick fixes, because the issue lies in the foundation of your identity, not just in the events around you. Sometimes the two occur together. A job loss, for example, may trigger not just financial instability, but also a collapse of self-worth if your identity was built on professional achievement. The outer event awakens an inner reckoning. Carl Jung emphasized that inner crises are invitations to transformation. They strip away the roles and beliefs that no longer serve you, forcing a confrontation with the authentic self. Without this confrontation, the pain may fade, but the growth remains undone. The ego is built to preserve stability. It thrives on consistency, even if that consistency is limiting. When crisis threatens the familiar structure, the ego interprets it as danger and mobilizes every defense to restore the old order. This resistance is not purely fear of pain. It is fear of the unknown. The old self may feel constricting, but it is predictable. The ego prefers the discomfort it knows to the uncertainty of transformation, which demands surrender. The ego's resistance can show up as denial, minimization, or frantic attempts to rebuild the same structures that just collapsed. In doing so, it delays the deeper work that crisis is urging, the shedding of identities that no longer fit. Carl Jung saw this resistance as a necessary tension in individuation. The ego must protect the self from being overwhelmed, but it must also learn to yield when transformation calls. Growth begins when the ego loosens its grip on the familiar. Crisis often exposes the fragility of what you thought was unshakable. Roles, beliefs, and relationships that seemed solid reveal their dependency on conditions that no longer exist. The collapse feels devastating, yet it is often the removal of what was never real. False structures are those built on fear, compliance, or borrowed ideals. They keep you safe from rejection, but also keep you distant from your authentic self. Crisis tears them down, sometimes violently, so that space can be made for truth. The dismantling process can be humiliating because it strips away identities you invested in for years. You may feel naked without them. But it is in that vulnerability that the possibility of building on a genuine foundation first appears. Carl Jung viewed this destruction as a creative act of the psyche. By removing this scaffolding of the false self, crisis makes room for the architecture of wholeness, a structure that can withstand life because it is rooted in authenticity. The persona is the mask you present to the world. It is shaped by social demands and personal ambitions. In times of stability, the persona can dominate, making you believe it is the whole of who you are. Crisis disrupts this illusion. When the life circumstances that support the mask collapse, the persona can no longer function as before. The cracks that appear reveal parts of the self the mask was designed to conceal. This breakdown can feel like losing your identity, but it is actually the loss of a role. Beneath it, a more complex and authentic self has been waiting, often ignored because the persona was so efficient at keeping it hidden. Carl Jung saw this collapse as a necessary opening. Without the persona's dominance, the unconscious has space to speak, offering symbols, feelings, and insights that lead you beyond performance and into genuine self-discovery. When the persona loses its grip, the unconscious begins to surface. It does not speak in direct instructions, but in symbols, images, and dreams. These messages bypass logic, carrying truths the conscious mind has avoided or could not yet understand. During crisis, dreams often become more vivid. They may feel strange or unsettling because they are unfiltered expressions of hidden parts of the psyche. Symbols emerge as guides, each holding a fragment of the transformation your conscious self is resisting. These symbols are not random. They are the language of the deeper mind, reflecting your needs, fears, and unacknowledged strengths. By engaging with them, you begin to map the terrain between who you were and who you are becoming. Carl Jung believed that honoring these messages was central to individuation. Crisis opens the door for the unconscious to be heard, and through this dialogue, you integrate the parts of yourself that have long waited for recognition. Pain in crisis is not only a symptom of loss, it is a signal from within, drawing attention to the places in your psyche that have been neglected, denied, or split off from the story you tell about yourself. These unintegrated parts often carry both wounds and strengths. They remain in the shadow until life forces you to feel what you have avoided. Crisis makes avoidance impossible, compelling you to meet what has been left outside of awareness. The mind wants to numb this pain, to treat it as an enemy. But Jung saw pain as a guide. If you follow it with courage, it leads you to the parts of yourself that are essential for wholeness. Through facing this messenger, you begin the work of integration. The self that emerges is not free of pain, but it understands pain as a teacher, one that can reveal the deepest truths about who you are. Carl Jung believed that crisis shatters the rigid structures that keep the psyche in a fixed pattern. When these structures collapse, the unconscious is free to introduce new possibilities. This disruption creates a rare opening for deep psychological growth. In times of comfort, the ego resists profound change. It prefers stability to exploration. Crisis forces the ego to release its grip, not by choice but by necessity, creating space for transformation that would otherwise be resisted or delayed indefinitely. The fertile ground of crisis lies in its capacity to expose what is false and unnecessary. It strips away illusions, leaving only the essential. From this stripped-down state, the authentic self has a chance to take root and grow. Jung saw this as the heart of individuation. Crisis compels a meeting between the conscious and unconscious, forcing integration. The pain is real, but so is the potential for a more grounded, whole, and resilient self to emerge. When crisis removes the familiar landmarks of your life, you are forced to look inward. Without the distractions of stability, the shadow steps into view, carrying the parts of you that have been suppressed to maintain the comfort of certainty. The shadow contains traits you deny, emotions you avoid, and desires you bury, crisis makes them unavoidable. They rise not to punish you, but to demand recognition, reminding you that wholeness cannot exist without integrating these hidden aspects. Facing the shadow during crisis is unsettling because it dismantles your self-image. You see contradictions, wounds, and impulses that challenge who you believed you were. Yet in this confrontation lies the chance to become more complete and real. Carl Jung taught that meeting the shadow is an act of courage. It transforms crisis from pure loss into an initiation, turning the collapse of the old self into the foundation for a more authentic and integrated life. After a crisis, the self can feel fragmented. One part clings to the old identity, while another begins to sense a new way of being. The work is to create a bridge so these parts can meet rather than remain divided. This bridge is built through conscious reflection, honest dialogue with the unconscious, and small acts that honor your emerging truth. Each step affirms that the old self had value, but it is not the whole story of who you are. Integration does not erase the pain of what was lost. Instead, it transforms that pain into a source of strength. You begin to carry your wounds as part of your story rather than as barriers to living fully. Carl Jung saw this bridging as the essence of individuation. It is the process of moving from fragmentation toward wholeness, allowing the self born in crisis to coexist with the lessons and experiences of the life that came before. In crisis, despair can feel absolute. The future appears closed, and meaning seems absent. Yet Jung taught that transformation requires holding this despair alongside the faint, but persistent sense that something new could emerge from the ruins. This tension is not comfortable. The human impulse is to collapse entirely into hopelessness or to rush prematurely into false optimism. Both are escapes. The deeper work is to remain in the space where neither extreme takes full control. By staying with this tension, you create the psychological heat needed for transformation. It is like a crucible in which the old self dissolves while the new self begins to take shape. Even before you can fully name what it is becoming, Carl Jung saw this capacity as a form of strength. It is the ability to live between what is dying and what is not yet born, trusting that the psyche knows how to carry you toward the wholeness you cannot yet imagine. Crisis often brings experiences that logic alone cannot explain. Jung emphasized symbolic thinking as a way to engage with these moments. Symbols allow you to approach pain not just as suffering, but as a message carrying meaning beyond the immediate loss. Symbolic thinking transforms events from random misfortune into part of a larger psychological narrative. A dream, an image, or even a recurring number can serve as a bridge between the conscious mind and the deeper layers of the unconscious. In this way, symbols guide you through uncertainty. They offer direction when rational answers are absent. Each one invites reflection, asking what part of you is speaking and what transformation it might be calling forth in this moment. Carl Jung believed that crisis without symbolic thinking often leads to despair. But when you see your struggle as part of a mythic journey, you tap into resilience, creativity, and a sense of purpose that can carry you through the darkest times. A breakdown strips away what you relied on, leaving you in raw uncertainty. Without meaning, this void feels unbearable. Meaning-making transforms that same void into a threshold, turning the collapse of the old life into the entry for a new one. Meaning-making does not deny pain. Instead, it weaves pain into a coherent story, showing how it fits into the arc of your personal evolution. This story becomes a source of strength, allowing you to walk forward with a sense of direction. When you see crisis as a chapter in your individuation, each hardship becomes part of a larger design. Even the losses gain dignity because they contribute to the shaping of a more whole and conscious self. Carl Jung believed that the psyche seeks wholeness above comfort. Meaning-making aligns you with that aim, ensuring that the energy released by breakdown is used not for retreat into despair, but for stepping fully into transformation. Small crises are often dismissed as inconveniences, yet they carry the same structure as larger upheavals. They disrupt your plans, challenge your assumptions, and force small adjustments. Each one is a rehearsal for the greater transformations life will demand. By engaging with smaller crises consciously, you strengthen your capacity to remain centered under pressure. You learn how to navigate uncertainty, meet discomfort without panic, and respond with creativity rather than reflexive resistance. These moments reveal patterns in how you handle disruption. Do you deny it, rush to fix it, or pause to understand its deeper message? Small crises give you the chance to practice choosing the path that leads to growth rather than avoidance. Carl Jung saw preparation as essential to individuation. Welcoming smaller crises teaches the psyche that change is not an enemy. It builds trust in your ability to meet even the largest upheavals with awareness, resilience, and openness to transformation. Fear arises when the future is uncertain. The ego prefers the familiar, even if it is limiting, because it knows how to navigate it. Crisis removes that safety, forcing you to face the vast and unpredictable territory of the unknown. Avoidance strengthens fear. Engagement transforms it. By meeting the unknown with curiosity instead of resistance, you begin to see it not as a void, but as a living field of potential, holding possibilities that the old life could never offer. This relationship with the unknown is built through repeated encounters. Each time you step forward without guarantees, you strengthen trust in your inner resources. Fear becomes less of a barrier and more of a signal that growth is near. Carl Jung believed that the unknown is where the unconscious speaks most clearly. By transforming fear into openness, you align yourself with the psyche's natural movement toward wholeness, allowing life to reveal what you cannot yet imagine. Crisis rarely visits only once in a lifetime. It returns in different forms, each time stripping away what has drifted from your true self. These moments are not punishments, but reminders to realign with the deeper currents of your being. When life becomes overly defined by roles, expectations, or borrowed values, crisis interrupts the momentum. It shakes you awake, forcing you to question whether the path you are on still serves your soul's unfolding. Each recurrence offers a chance to shed another layer of falseness. Though uncomfortable, these moments prevent you from settling into an existence that may be safe but is far from authentic or alive. Carl Jung saw this pattern as a gift. Crisis calls you back to what is essential, ensuring that the journey toward individuation remains active, vital, and deeply connected to the truth of who you are. Emerging from crisis is not a return to who you were before. It is an arrival at a self that has been tested, stripped, and rebuilt from the inside out. This self carries both the scars and the wisdom born from survival. The deeper sense of self that follows crisis is grounded in authenticity. You have seen what can be lost and discovered what remains unshakable. This clarity reshapes priorities, relationships, and the way you move through the world. Crisis teaches you that identity is not fixed. It evolves through each challenge, growing more resilient and more aligned with your inner truth. What once felt like destruction now reveals itself as the soil for a more honest life. Carl Jung believed that such transformation is the heart of individuation. By walking through the fire of crisis, you do not simply heal, you emerge as someone more whole, more awake, and more deeply connected to the essence of your being. Carl Jung warned that a life built on avoiding crisis often becomes shallow. Comfort can protect you from pain, but it also shields you from the profound transformations that only arise when the familiar order is disrupted. The purpose of individuation is not to create an unshakable life, but to grow a self that can meet life's shaking with openness. Crisis is not the enemy. It is a crucible in which the hidden potential of the psyche is refined. Avoiding crisis may preserve stability, but it leaves the deeper layers of the self untouched. Meeting crisis with awareness turns it into an ally, a force that dismantles what is false so that the truth can take root. Jung's reminder is clear. You are not here to live untouched by change. You are here to let crisis shape you into someone more whole, more awake, and more capable of living from the truth of who you truly are.